this computer. All right, the recording has begun. Welcome everybody to our first sort of iteration of the Mastering the Game of Allyship podcast. Currently, this is going out only to the people in the Mastering the Game of Allyship course, but maybe someday this will be something that we'll be able to kick out to everyone. I really wanted to have these conversations because while allyship is a really big topic, I think getting specific as to different people's perspectives and needs on that is going to be really helpful and, demystifying like, what is this thing called allyship? It's different for everybody. It shows up in a different way. And so being able to take all these different perspectives is going to be the thing that pushes you to the next level. And our first guest is a dear friend of mine from way back in college, Salim Moore. What it do, my guy?
Hey, number one. I didn't realize I was going to be the first. I am really happy to be here. Hey, everyone. My name is Salim Moore. I'm here in Chicago, Illinois. We've had some rolling thunder throughout the day, so if you hear any big booms, it's from that, but it probably be kind of calm. And I went to college with Wendell at Reed in Portland, Oregon, and I moved to Chicago a few years after graduating in 2011. I moved to Chicago in 2016 to go to grad school. And after that, I got a job at the Art Institute of Chicago where I work. And I work on the curatorial side of things, but I also do a lot of stuff with public engagement and accessibility at the museum too. And so I'm really excited to be here and have this conversation today.
That is awesome. So for our listeners at home, depending on how they're looking at this, how would you describe the melange that is your identity, so that people can sort of know what perspective you're coming from?
Yeah, okay, yeah, absolutely. Well, I am a Black American, in the sense that both of my parents are from the same very rural part of Georgia. And, our family's history was not like 12 Years a Slave or Harriet Tubman, in the sense that like my family descendants, they never got free. So they endured the whole of slavery until emancipation came through. And so I would identify, as African American or Black American.
That's a fun distinction. I love having that conversation because I'm always just like, no one in my family has been to Africa. I am a Black American. We don't get the same hyphenation rules as like an Asian American or an Indian American.
Yeah, we don't have them. And what else? I identify as male. I've actually been thinking about this recently. Just with the conversation in the news around Black Lives Matter, and I work in a museum, and just seeing people have very new, like entry-level stuff into conversations about race. I've been thinking about like, I never look at artwork or make artwork. I never look at artwork in Black. And just thinking about identity like that. But I identify also as an artist. I definitely identify as an ally and an accomplice. My sexual orientation is, I like to say straight but not narrow. And that definitely comes with the territory of being mostly surrounded by artists because I went to art school for grad school. And so 90% of my friend group is queer. And I would say maybe that gets a little bit lower in the classroom, but it's still pretty majority that way. Yeah.
Great. I want to actually tease apart this phrase that you just used that I've heard like in the last couple of weeks, that I think will be interesting for my own edification. And then I think the listeners, the ally versus accomplice. Like, what does that sort of mean for you. So there's definitely, I see these
Mm-hmm.
two. We do a lot of parts integration in this particular
Mm-hmm.
container. So I immediately saw
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, there's an ally self, there's an accomplice self. How do they interact with each other? How do they feel about each other? And where
Mm-hmm.
do they show up in like different contexts?
Yeah, that's a really good question, especially thinking about the like right wearing different hats between. Um, and that like so let me just rewind like a little bit. So basically it's been on my mind too, especially in the past couple of weeks, talking to someone in my life who's has a lifelong commitment to civil rights and social justice, and that is my mother.
Mm.
And she and I were just catching, she actually called like there was a lot of protesting, rioting, looting, and a few even counter protests in Chicago. A couple weeks ago, my mom called me to see if I was safe, and I was like, "Of course I'm safe. I'm going to the protest, but I'm, people in Chicago look out for each other, and we stay safe together." Um, how's it out there in Pasadena, California, where my mom lives? And my mom is like in her mid 60s now, so she's been around the block a few times, and she was kind of telling me that she's tired of kind of going through the motions. She's seen big changes in her lifetime, but they're not any of the kind of major changes that a lot of people want to see, and she's been let down by allies and friends, and and that just happens, I think, to anyone, right? As the more you get older, you get wizened to things. But something she said is that she is looking for accomplices and collaborators instead of allies, and because she's tired. And what she kind of talked about is, right, she is like, the accomplice, that's like I think she kind of talks about it in terms of levels or tiers is a good way to kind of use a metaphor for it, even though it doesn't necessarily have to be that. But she was like, yeah,
You're in the
like
perfect place for talking about levels, and so that's a huge piece of the work that we do too. Is how do you level up? How do you grow? How do you
yeah,
deepen?
how do you grow? Exactly. And so, she could name of just a handful of friends who I've met and friends who are older figures from Pasadena who are accomplices. And those are kind of people in her estimation and the way I was introduced to this and have also thought about it separately. Accomplices are people who are doing the work without any kind of prodding or encouragement. Like, so they're like, we can think of it in the most simple way, right? An accomplice is somebody who is like showing up at your shoulder. Like in my visual head, I kind of see it as in like like if you think of a movie poster banner when it's like Star Wars or like any kind of RPG where they have like a muscular tank. It's usually like a slender rogue. But right there, those people are all accomplices because they're there on a mission together. And even though they have different roles and different personalities, like everybody is debriefed on what the goal is. And we can assume when those parties break up, they're out there doing that. And so for me, like, right, like there's some things that I would consider myself an ally in and an accomplice in that kind of vary, which is a really kind of good part about the question, because like, right, like, I think my kind of social justice awakening happened at Reed College, like in my teenage years and through my early 20s. And I attended a number of workshops and trainings and made a lifelong commitment to social justice. And that's just an ideology and something that I believe is, as a general thing, is anyone from an underrepresented background should have equity and freedom of mobility throughout society. But with that said, like there comes proximity. So for example, like in the museum where I work, like I'm 30, I just turned 32 now.
33.
And I was in a museum, and like I said, so museums have different departments, and I work in the curatorial side of thing, which is very academic. Curators kind of just in the books with the artwork. We don't really engage with the public too much. But I like to work with people, and I happen to have a lot of friends in learning and public engagement, which is the like agitating, more activist, left leaning, specifically in my museum, right? But these are the people who work with the public and make the museum open to all. And there is someone who was Sarah Lucas, one of my coworkers, and he and he does his purview is people with disabilities and elderly populations. And he asked me to team up with him on a noontime gallery talk. These are just short 45-minute long talks in the galleries where we look at artwork, but for a population of people who are blind. And so that was new for me. And I was like, I was nervous, man. I didn't know, I hadn't really thought about like identity first language or ability first language. Like, is it a blind person or someone who is blind, and what's the preferences? And then like we have different materials, but theoretically I was like, oh, this is dope. Like the museum should have this every day. Like I just like that idea that like, yeah, a museum is a very visual place, but people from these populations, like who don't really see museums as being for them, should have it for them. So in that regard, right, like I think I was like already wanting to see more of that. And that's where I would say the ally part kind of comes in for me. But in the actual experience, and then, it got me thinking, it's like, I don't have any friends who are blind. Not a single one. And then of course, I was thinking about like, oh, like how many people in my social circle are able-bodied versus who aren't, and thinking about the other ways in which my social circle could be more integrated. And that's kind of where I see like the accomplice kind of coming in, right? An accomplice is really embedded in X community, whatever it is. You can say ability, racial identity, class, and of course there's intersections of these things.
But it seems like there's a personal relationship aspect. Like the metaphor that you used, it's perfect. Again, I cut my teeth in role playing. My shtick is role playing personal development. It almost seems like the ally is an essential role. Signals to the world, I am ready to be a part of a group, but the accomplice level is the actual craft therein of, okay, now we are a group. What are we doing? And there's an allyship. I think some of the feelings that people who want to identify as allies but like feel weird about it, and people who like are kind of tired of people identifying as allies, the tension that I'm hearing is exactly what you're saying. That proximity aspect is just like, okay, you're an ally over there, but like my problem is right here, and the people that are right here are the people that I'm going to trust to help me specifically alleviate whatever situation. And that solidarity can only be projected, even if it's being projected at distance, it's like projected through a field of intimacy. It's like, you might be over there, but if we're not like close and have that sense of understanding, whatever you're doing doesn't travel, and it doesn't really have that sort of meaning aspect until you, deepened some sort of relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Deepening relationships, showing up, and something that you just said really makes me think, right? Like, ally is like, I love the fundamentals, sometimes too much. Like I love when you think of role-playing games, like I also like have ADHD, and so like I'm the person who will spend like 45 minutes to 2 hours creating a character and re-rolling and doing all the fun, literally like the eye color, the eyebrows, and then like start playing the game and then be like, wait, I gotta go back to the fundamentals. And that's like very important. It is the beginning, it's the foundation. And so we should put a lot of focus there and emphasis, but it can't stagnate there. Because even if it, like, you actually have to like, in this example of me like playing World of Warcraft or something, it's like I have to play the game, and I just have to accept that like my character is not going to be as cool as all the other characters running around, but it's mine. And so right? And so and the fact is, it's like when we live an organic human life, we only have a capacity to do so much. And so we do have to pick our issues and pick our battles. But it's definitely a tough position because we want people to be allies and we want people to be engaged, but there's going to be different like degrees to which anyone can engage on a certain issue. But the cool idea, right, is that like, there's some neighborhoods in Chicago, and even though it's kind of cheesy, like there's some like very like liberal neighborhoods in Chicago where every single house on the street will have like hate has no home here, Black Lives Matter, like the equality sign. Is it I forgot what that bumper sticker is, right? And so that's kind of like the low level signaling, but in some ways it creates a sense of what people will and will not tolerate, even if they are not necessarily engaged. It means that any of those people could be tapped to call to action. And that's a big responsibility, and so I definitely understand people hesitating to want to be an ally, because to actively claim that means it's like, oh, like I'm really gonna be for real. I don't want to tiptoe around this. And I definitely was there, like when I had friends who were asking me to be an ally, like in college. They were like, you should call yourself a feminist. And I'd be like, oh, I don't know about that. That just sounds really intense, and it's not it's partially because of the title, but it's also because of what it would mean in my positioning and willing to be vocal and speak up and be a little uncomfortable in the world,
There's a Confucian concept. I was a Chinese literature major. I'm never going to leave like my China training. Confucian concept called rectifying the names. And like this is
rectifying the names.
I think this is why identity politics is so sort of fraught for people, because to be named as something, there suddenly becomes the embodiment of that name and the expectations that come in. I think there is a set of responsibilities that people have for being an ally. They're not really codified. I think what you've said that really resonates with me in the work that I do is that like there are different levels of depth across different types of intersection, and it seems like if you're not being called out to be on basically an adventure that you're not normally sort of connected to, there still is a low-key responsibility by holding on to that name, that there's work that you're doing like on your own. Like you haven't been called, like if you're a reservist, you're still going to boot camp. Like you still know how to like shoot a gun. You still have like your stuff at the ready. And in theory, there should be no fear for you to be called in because that's what you signed up for. But what I'm sort of hearing you say, also something that I've experienced, is that the ability to sign up to be an ally, the cost and preparation is low enough that we get the signal, but not sort of well understood or embodied in a way where if anyone was called, they would feel comfortable or enthusiastic showing up, or even being able to recognize which calls they should or should not show up for. This is something that I hear someone saying, we need people to do this. And someone's like, that doesn't feel like my thing, but also I don't know what my thing is. So they either go into a situation that kind of low-key traumatizes them and actually is ineffective, and then never kind of signal themselves being an ally ever again, or they never make the step in the first place because it's like, that's not for me. I'm in general support of it, but I haven't really found and we're really given permission to know what that is. And this kind of helps me into sort of a pivot that I want to talk about, because bringing in the hero's journey to it, there's this character called the Guide. Gandalf goes to Bilbo and says, you're going on an adventure. In the normal story of like human history, that kind of has always been the narrative, but right now we're seeing a very specific moment in time where the people that need allies and accomplices are kind of over having to also be the Gandalfs, to go to someone's house to say, hey, here's the adventure, let's go. That's tiresome. Like, I don't want to fight my battle and also have to be like, in my particular example, your magical Negro. But that calling out, that calling forth, that guide function is still really important. And so I'm curious to make that transition. So let's say state A is ally, and state B is accomplice, like, is there sort of any sort of what advice would you give to someone to sort of be their own guide towards having that identity, the embodying allyship and then moving to accomplishship, but without needing to be pulled, dragged, coerced, but that it was sort of a natural progression of someone's identity was to go there?
Yeah. I mean, I think you really have to, there's two parts to this, right? Because it goes back to one thing I said earlier, which I think is that we can't do everything. And that's why we live in a society. And it's wonderful that we live in a society, because I can rely on other people to do things that ensure my safety and freedom. And so this can work on a microcosm too, because like, I definitely remember moments where I would feel overwhelmed, where it's like what happened maybe when you're a teenager, because all the problems in the world, eating too much fish, global warming, ability and identity politics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you can't take on all of it. And so I think you have to look within yourself and see what is really meaningful and calling to you, but on a deep level, not like really be introspective about it, because I think sometimes there can be things that are very easy because they seem apolitical. And then but the idea is that, right, if you're already into that, you will naturally read more, learn more, find yourself volunteering, because it's already a place you want to be. And inevitably, once you get into this thing, these intersections, I think, will inevitably lead you down other roads. So a good concrete example is, I have a friend who is who I went to high school with, and he's also Black, but he was always like, I was always kind of like, in our friend group, the loud one, and I was considered the person who didn't keep the peace or stirred the pot, and this is one of my best friends, but he like kind of kept it easy, and he was always like, well, I'm going to do environmental politics. And he went on to study engineering, and he went on to get a PhD at MIT. And I was always kind of miffed, because I was like, dude, like, our high school has like 4 Black people, and you hang out with me and my group of friends, and I need you. You're supposed to be my ally. Like, the other people are hanging out with the athletes, but you and I are here with the nerds. You have to back me up. But he never felt comfortable with it. But you know what? Throughout, he was obviously with like sharing some of these same lived personal experiences, but not speaking to them. But through doing environmental and sustainability work, he got the language of actively and vocally talking about racial politics, because environmental stuff intersects with race stuff, and intersects with gender stuff, and intersects with class stuff. And even though he is by career an environmental scientist, and he works in solar, and a Black man, those things like are entangled, right? We have these entanglements, and so you get it plugged in, and through the web of entanglements, you will find yourself dealing with other things. And of course, that's not going to happen overnight, and I think that's why people get frustrated, because it's a slow process. But I personally would rather have a lifelong commitment. Hopefully not by the end of your life, but like, like, it's definitely like, well, if you're 98, it's like, thanks, it was a little late. Stop being racist when you're 98. But it's like, but it's also real and sincere. And I think that's because it takes people time to process stuff. Yeah. And so, trying to move from ally to accomplice, to use your analogy, like, we could also look at the figure of Strider. Because Strider is he's already there in the road, in the cloak, in the mud, out in the rain, making campfires, having a really hard time. But he doesn't really need any goading to be involved with this fight for justice.
Yes. This is Strider, Lord of the Rings, right?
Yes, Strider and
Right.
Lord of the Rings, but it's also his story as a process of becoming, when he actually accepts his destiny and becomes Aragorn, you know. And I think that could be, he would provide a useful useful model in this kind of metaphor, because we kind of have like, the hobbits, who are like these middle class, happy-go-lucky people who don't have really any real issues, and then we have people who are already like deep in on the other level, like the scholarly elves, but they have their issues too, because they're isolated and kind of, but I like this character of Strider because he's already getting his hands dirty, but he's also running away from things, maybe we could think of him as running away from his like white privilege or something. But then he's like, yo, I've got this privilege and I can also use it.
I want
Yeah.
to dig deep into this, because it's another conversation that's come up. And again, I think this is really going to connect to our listeners. Today's lesson was really around the way that we've sort of broken down the courses. Week 1 was a student self, like how do you going to choose to learn about like this stuff. Week 2 has been your tenure self, like if you have a goal, your allyship is going to be emergent out of that larger goal. It's kind of like what you're talking about with even with your work in the museum and with art. It's like you as an activist is always going to be entangled in that. Anyone who either doesn't have the space for those natural entanglements to happen is going to be diverted away from their goal to be an ally, unless they know what it is and can design something sort of around that. And so this Aragorn Strider tension is really great, but specifically around this one word that I love to dissect: the difference between privilege and power. I do feel like he moves into his power, but the shift is, did Strider not have power and Aragorn does have power? Is there some sort of alchemization of privilege to power in a positive direction? Because I see this allergic reaction that people have to, oh, my white privilege, I have to like get rid of it. I'm like, nah, man, like go Aragorn with that shit and like
you
do
have to
something with
use
it.
it.
And you feel like you have to feel it. Like you'd have to actually feel it and enjoy it to be able to use it, because if it's always a burden, that's how it felt with Strider. Like we go to the movie, it's like, oh no, my blood, men suck, everything's like terrible, blah blah. Hanging out with elves, and it's like, the part of me is like, get over yourself, bro. Like that's your sword, that's your thing. Like let's go.
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I think that's a really good way of thinking about it, because he is running away. And so, right, like privilege it's so interesting, because like privilege is definitely the sticky part, because I think we all are privileged. I grew up thinking it like black was the best, and I honestly was confused about white privilege, because my dad told me my whole life that I was privileged to be black, and I was like, yeah, this is tight. And then I was like, wait, what do you mean? I'm privileged though. I'm privileged. They're privileged too. Everyone has privileges. That's how I was feeling about it. And I think and having power power is relational. I have never, like, this is one of those things where I saw the academic quote out of context. It's like, I'm never going to read that book, but I'll take that idea. But I feel like it was maybe Foucault or somebody quoting Foucault that I read. And I have only read very limited Foucault, and I've never read him on power. But I believe he proposed an argument that may belong to him or may just belong to other philosophy, that power is relational, and is the sense that anyone can have power, but it really depends on who you are in relationship to. And I've always kind of thought of that, because I like that idea in the suggestion that it's dynamic. Because there are, like, right, we can think of the recent event in the news with Amy Cooper, the white woman who called the police, or threatened to call the police on the birder, right? And so this is a really good example, and this is because it's intersectional. Like in that situation, like I think in generic archetypes, we would think of women as having less power than men. But right, in that situation, she was able to call upon a certain kind of power and use it as a threat. So, and it was because of the context that's relational. And so I've always thought of it that way. But I think the thing that has to be understood is that power could be toxic and it can be beneficial. And so to answer your question, it's like, for me, it makes me think of how can you wield it?
Mm.
You know, it's like that scene. I don't know if y'all have seen Blade. I don't remember which Blade movie it is, but Wesley Snipes is saying like, use it, like the anger, right? And like, and the guy's like shooting the arrows. I think it's the whoever plays Deadpool, that actor, Ryan Reynolds, and like, you know, they're angry because they lost their crew member, and and Blade is teaching his apprentices how to control their power and channel it. And that's what we want, right? We want people to go from the transformation from Strider to Aragorn, because Strider's kind of running away from this great privilege, this great responsibility, this great power that he has. And then once he accepts it, he can wield it and use it to its full potential to benefit other people. And that is what's being called upon, right? And there's so many different levels in our lived experiences, because I've definitely been in workshops where people have been like, use the power that you have that's afforded by your male privilege to intervene in situations on the train when like someone's getting catcalled or something. You know, because in that situation there is a power differential, where generally, like, when these men who are harassing women, right, they're not doing it because they really think they're going to get a positive response. It's them using their power in a toxic way over someone else. And so in that can be a time for it to be matched. And that's like on an interpersonal level. You know, I think in the recent conversations, people have been talking about using one's, in this sense, white privilege and the power afforded by it to actively dismantle systems of white supremacy. And that's in the workplace, in the neighborhoods, and actually using that power, not thinking of it as a burden, but being like, how can I extend this to other people? And I think that is a tricky, I think it can be done. I think what people assume is that there's just a limited amount, and that if I share it with other people, I'm necessarily giving it up. But that's not true. You're not giving up anything. You're actually increasing your amount of power, because what I think is that, right, like I said earlier, we exist in a society, and other people's abilities to do things in society make me more free. The same way that I can count on other allies and accomplices out in the world doing the work in their respective areas means that I can sleep at night, because I can be like, you know what, like, I don't know enough about science and climate change, but I can count on those people out there who are working around the clock and really passionate about it to get this done.
The people reading the terms and conditions.
Yeah, exactly.
There's so much here. Like, first, I want to I'm going to do a quick like pop culture rundown. I cut my teeth at a pop culture podcast, so like this is bringing me to that space. Like, we got Aragorn to Strider to Aragorn, Simba to Simba. Like, the plot of like The Lion King is also
absolutely.
I run away from
accepting
power,
the mantle,
but then I sort of re-inhabit it. I do think, because I love narrative, because I love stories, there's always two heroes' journeys that occur. And a lot of the work that I'm trying to do is to really account for both in a world that's really pushing people to do one. So there's the racism exists. Let's take that example. The end of this story is racism does not exist. We go, great, that's our MacGuffin. It's the gold. The gold jewel is, if we take the jewel and we destroy it, then we've won. But there are a series of transformations, inner transformations, that one has to go through to even believe that the thing can be destroyed, then to believe that they can be part of like the narrative for the thing to be destroyed, and then to like get the crew together. There's actually a long series of these internal journeys that go on. And when I see people seemingly struggle with what ends up being like a clear answer, find what systemic racism is, every time you see it, destroy it, it
Mm-hmm.
seemingly ignores the inner journey that a lot of people have. And this is something that I want to connect to what you said earlier. Like the Black privilege that we do have is, it's not really a choice to call out like the stuff, to like survive this world, to like do this stuff. Like we've done like the full kata. We're 9 Dan at dealing with microaggressions and all this stuff. The ask for us to like advocate for ourselves and other people when we can is actually really easy comparatively. But some of the people being called onto this journey emotionally, and not to like clown them too hard, a bunch of babies. And there's a time in which I could be angry with that, but when I look at the emotional journey that one would have to go to even recognize and inhabit healthy power, everyone who I see doing it terribly, I'm just like, yeah, you're kind of doing like what a baby would do with this. Like if I gave a baby a gun and just said, figure out how to live in the world with it, like you see like toxic masculinity happening. You see racism or sexism and all this stuff. And so my question is always, how do we find people's sort of emotional self? What push-ups, training montage do they get so that when you choose to inhabit that power, it's something that can be used? Like the Blade example, I think is perfect, because the Star Wars has the exact opposite problem where it's like, let the hate flow through you. No. That's bad. That's the side of the dark side. That's something that could destroy you. The character, of course, the one character in Star Wars that exists in this in-between is actually Mace Windu. Mace Windu has the 7th form of lightsaber fighting, which actually channels the dark side into the battle. He's so good at alchemizing his negative feelings that he can actually be like a Jedi Grandmaster and use that to sort of like fight. Everyone else is like, no, you can't do it. Why? You'll immediately turn evil. Just sorry. Like if you show up this way, like you can't handle it. The type of training and internal like alchemy you'd have to do, it's just too high. And why would we never want to create like a potential, Sith Lord? So the question becomes like, they don't talk about that. That's his side character. He's not the main story, but my brain, as him being one of the few Black characters in the canon, asks those questions of like, what kind of like mental swollenness did Mace Windu have to get to be able to use the basically exclusively Sith lightsaber fight? And if we are all having these like negative feelings around allyship, around race, around like all these identities, is it in fact that alchemy, that power that sort of our emotional reactions afford us? Is it the being able to like control and wield that, the thing that's getting in the way of what ultimately, from an, again, material external way, isn't that hard? The bystander example that you gave me, I read an article on it, and like when I've talked to men about like, so why aren't we showing up as bystanders when we can? It's like, you objectively are just as strong as this man. You might even be like a martial artist and could kick this guy's ass. Like, why aren't you showing up? And it's the part that's driving the car in that situation is a 5-year-old. It's just like, no, I'm scared. Even though I materially have the power, I don't believe that I have it. And the literal limiting belief isn't the capability, it's something else. Anyway, that's just something that I heard in the in-betweens of a lot of the stuff that you said that was really cool. Maybe it was me projecting it, but I heard it.
No, I actually, this is why it's a conversation, right? Because like, and this is a really good example of kind of what I've been saying about freedom is like, you're pulling out good stuff. You're making me look good. I'm making you look good. And we're all going to shine together. Especially because like just the act of getting thoughts out of our heads into words, maybe onto paper, can be fraught. But I absolutely love what you said about this focusing on the internal struggle, because I think that is a really big part, because we're kids. Many of us are lucky to live in kidland where we don't have to grow up super fast. And so for some people in these situations, it's accepting, it's leaving childhood behind. It's accepting adult responsibilities in the sense that you're accepting responsibility for others and accepting that things are unfair. Because I think like a lot of like the people that I grew up with, me and my friends, we always assume that like everything was fair and like generally fair. And part of accepting this power imbalance is realizing, oh, like those are my really close friends, and they're just like me, and I spend time with them, and we have sleepovers together, and realizing that, oh, like we are a little different, and it's not this kind of fantasy, or and so waking up to reality. And so that internal little bit, we are accepting a really big responsibility. And then I think once we accept that, then we can go on to really use, I didn't know that about Mace Windu, but we can really use that ability um, to be agitators or to subvert things. His name was Noel. I cannot remember his last name, but he was a white scholar on racism. Um, and I will, like, if you have comments, I'll look it up and you can put a link to his bio. But he wrote about racism from a white perspective, and basically was like, he wanted to make himself an enemy of whiteness and become a race traitor. He's like, that's the most noble thing you can do. But first he had to accept a few things. It was like, I have the power, and with this power, I am a point of leverage for change. And then there was like also, right, he had his arguments down. And it's a very simple one, but like, right, it's the same reason why nobody ever has an issue with people celebrating St. Patrick's Day, or like Midsummer, or like Maslenitsa, like Russian Spring, right? Because those are ethnicities. But when we think about white as a category, it's not an ethnicity, there's no culture there. And that's why, like, I think sometimes confused people are like, well, how come we can't have white pride? And it's like, because it's not a real thing. You can have Irish pride, you can have Norwegian pride, you can have Swedish pride. And so Noel, I do not remember his name, I'm sorry, or his last name, but that was kind of what he was getting at, is like, we have to eliminate this empty category, and then we will all become free. Because this is actually it's not only slowing other people down, it's slowing us down. And he was maybe like a little bit of a Mace Windu in this regard, because he was using both sides of the Force, but channeling it to bring about good in the world. And I
love that, because there also seems, what I hear in the story, even that you're telling about him, is that he had a vision of how he wanted to show up. Maybe not even of like the future itself, but even kind of abstractly, he was like, there's this category called white, we're done with it. And he could imagine a world where that was gone in sort of specific terms, that he could turn that into kind of specific actions. I do think one of the differences between the allyship and the accomplice is that the ally, there's almost like they connect with the collective consciousness of like, we can all vaguely agree that general human flourishing is nice, and when all of us suffer, one of us suffers, all of us suffers, vaguely. But when we start looking to like our piece of that like puzzle, this is something that's like big. I truly believe that like the parts of us, myself included, I'd even say that you have it, the parts of us that uphold white supremacy don't want to change. Like all of our stuckness, all of our internal resistance around it, like if we truly hold in our conscious thoughts, like I want to move through this world, the only thing that could stop us would be a part that sees this world and goes, yes, I like it, I feel safe, I can do the thing. And without like demonizing that part, recognizing like, what are you getting out of this? And can we offer you a higher, more complex thing? And that, I think, is where the accomplice space becomes really fascinating. Again, I'm just chewing on this term as I'm really like starting to embrace it, even in this conversation. The mission, the how am I finding the higher expression of myself in this work, in relationship to people. Like we have the D&D party because a party is more powerful than an individual. A collection of individuals with passion moving in a direction make things happen. It's the Rogue One of it all. Like, okay, we'll get a squad together and we'll go do the thing. And the question becomes, like, how do you find your mission and how do you find your squad? I do think it's easier for the people that are having the problem to recognize that. And I think it's also easy for those people to choose the people that they already trust to do that. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's a twofold. I wouldn't call it an issue. Don't really like thinking in problem terms, but
Mm-hmm.
how are we stewarding accomplices? Like how do we what's level one accomplice that can pull people away from generalized allyship, but that we know is increasing their ability to relate deeply, versus I think the way that we are kind of inviting people into allyship is increased material sacrifice, which again, fine, but I don't want a bigger donation. I don't want more books read. I want closer proximity and deeper relation. And that forest, kind of for humans in general, doesn't have a lot of fixed paths short of just friendship. But we're also kind of seeing that like the way that friendship even shows up is so accidental that like
Mm-hmm.
we almost need like a craft. We need a crew of trailblazers that can go through that forest and then tell people, no, it's chill. Here's what you can do.
Yeah. Yeah. I love this question because I think that that's kind of that, like, it speaks to me personally, like when you were talking about parts of us that are comfortable with things. And I remember, like, again, when I was saying when I was in college and my friends were like, you should call yourself a feminist, and part of my hesitation was like, that means I'm going to be a little bit more vulnerable in the world. I'm giving up a little bit of this comfort that I have. And then after spending time with these people and realizing that I was getting more out of my life and being able to relate to people more, that I hadn't actually lost anything. And maybe what happened is that I got more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And I think that happens forever. It's just like, right, the way you talked about it, there's these little parts of ourselves that are tucked away, that are really comfortable with the status quo. And as other parts get knocked down, we become more comfortable and then we find new parts. So it's a constant, we're constantly reflecting and growing. The idea is to constantly be reflecting and growing in a direction that makes other people free, or that makes life better for everyone around us.
I had a friend
And
say something to me that, again, just that resonated with me really hard. It was sort of the knowledge is power. It's a corollary of the knowledge is power. So if knowledge is power, how do you use your knowledge to liberate or subjugate? He was a very like kind of black and white thinker in that way.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it does seem like that we have this overabundance of knowledge. We don't really have a skill set for like knowing, have we liberated anyone? Have we liberated ourselves?
Yeah.
That weirdly feels like it forces the default of maybe you might not be actively subjugating, but if the knowledge is there, there's almost this like subconscious knowledge, awareness of your benefit, even if you can't consciously know it, like knowing that it can fall on either of those, like that kind of shows up, and the power becomes liberating, not just for yourself, but for the people that you affect, because if you're liberating people and you're liberating yourself, the continued use of that power keeps having that feeling, and so there's no real reason to shy away. I mean, your edge will always be the place at which you're most vulnerable, but once you cross that edge, well, you're probably a lot less vulnerable there, either through having it kicked out of you a little bit and learning a lesson, or recognizing that that vulnerability was imagined and that you actually don't have a problem.
Yeah, the vulnerability was imagined. And then also, I think one way that you realize it is that you look around and you see who you're surrounded by. I was actually laughing to myself yesterday because I was at this YouTube channel of this guy who just deconstructs white nationalist arguments, because there's a lot of toxic white nationalists that have recently been removed from YouTube but are still all over Twitter. And he was just breaking down some of their old YouTube videos and why they're foolish. And I was like, man, these people are so white that they don't like spice. And I was like, I would hate to have dinner with these people, not even because like assuming I got invited somehow to this dinner party, I just assumed the food would be terrible because it wouldn't have any spices because all spices are foreign.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, we want the opposite of that, right? It's like you want to find yourself at a potluck and look around and be like, whoa, like how did I get here? Like there's people of all differences here and we're all celebrating. And this is not just like a one-time thing. This is like my New Year every year or my Easter every year, right? And I think that's how one way of checking is just seeing who is in your social circle and who you are forming relations with and who has invited you onto the inside of your life, of their life.
I want to dig into that one a little bit, and then I'll let you go because we're pushing an hour. But this is one that I've heard people, myself even included to a degree, feel the most comfortable around. So I want to just create space to dialogue about this because there is a fear, a deep fear of vulnerability around what ultimately people are going to describe as fetishization, as even like tokenism, as even like we being raised in the 90s. I had this vision of there should always be at least one Black person in every group. And I even saw it to a degree in a lot of ways, having been that person. But then I also had to face the fact that the world wasn't keeping up their end of the bargain. I, in all of my spaces, was the one Black person, but everyone didn't have the one Black person. They weren't doing their Captain Planet thing. They weren't doing their Power Rangers. Like, look, like that was kind of the 90s space. And we actually could imagine and choose to have that. But what I hear you say is that should be an emergent quality that's also something that should be desired and held in dynamic tension, because there's so many people that are like, well, I don't want to do it for these wrong reasons. And I'm like, but how much do you want it and truly believe that in and of itself, it is a valuable thing? Because there are some people in my life that are like, oh, I have my one Black friend, and the positive experience that they're having of having the one Black friend is the thought immediately after the I have one Black friend. Sort of there's a relief thought versus I have one Black friend and that Black friend enriches my life to the point that I am constantly like moving naturally towards getting more iterations of difference in space, and it's good. And I go, honestly, that one sounds great. It's moving you into that closer, deeper relational space. It is more vulnerable. I almost like would rather people like actively go after their Captain America, Captain Planet future than to administrate that inner feeling, which seems more like, have I checked my boxes? Like it feels different, even if the result is the same. And I'm wondering, like, how would you help someone through like that distinction? Because it does feel like you need one, and the pursuit therein is stopping people from doing it.
Yeah, that is a tension, right? Because you don't want to. I think it has to happen organically. And what I'm kind of saying is that trusting in the process, it will. I think that it's definitely tough because, right, you don't want it to be like a tokenization or fetishization where you're like 1990s multiculturalism, right? We want people there in their fully authentic selves and all of their complexities. And that's what having friends is. Because it doesn't matter, right? You could have like one friend from X category, but then they're also going to have other overlaps, you know? And if they're your friends, there's probably going to be some things you really love about them and some things that really frustrate you about them, you know? And so that's all, you're taking all that in. And I think that like, even for me, it's like, right, where you're working on building relationships, especially as when we get older. Kids make friends super easy. You know, kids will be like, we're the same height, let's play. I've seen that with my own eyes. And I was like, that is so simple. I wish it could be like that. But as we get older, we have more baggage and more hangups. So it is more of like a process. But I think that, right, as you build and invest into relationships, those relationships will grow, and then you'll find yourself in unexpected places and at unexpected tables and in unexpected offices with more opportunities, because it allows you to just relate to the world's population more. but the key is to make sure that you're keeping those friendships and relationships authentic, because it shouldn't be like, whew, got that done, you know. I think it should be like thinking like, okay, here's a personal example. Like I remember when I was a kid, like in elementary school and middle school, I really knew that like a friend had crossed a certain milestone or threshold when they had like taken a shower at my house, because they had to be picked up like really early the next morning to go to church or to go to like some event. And I was just like, whoa, like this friend of mine went into our bathroom and like he used
Saw all of
my
our
towel.
exotic creams.
Yeah, exactly. That was one milestone that happened when I was young. And then it was just a normal thing. It would be like my friends would come over, like, when we could drive, and they would be like, oh, yeah, can I take a shower when I get to your house? Like, I'm really sweaty. And be like, yeah, sure, AJ, sure, Julian, do that. And then another big one that my mom and my family kind of had was like, this milestone was crossed when, like, because my parents are Southern, and so they have a certain type of manners, like
Yep.
people are guests in the house. And it was a certain threshold when you stopped being a guest, when my mom would be like, hey, can you wash the dishes? Can you help clear the table? And then, like, me and my friends would be washing the dishes side by side, and I'd be like, welcome, you've leveled up. Also, you just gained work,
That's perfect.
Like, because a guest is like an honored position, but it's like now you're even in a circle, but you also have responsibilities now.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah. And so that's kind of how I think of it too. It's like, that's a threshold. And so with your relationships, you think like, oh, right, everybody does this. It's like, have you ever been to this person's event for this, like the inner circle, or are you vulnerable with these people? And that has to happen. There's no real guidebook for that. It's just lived experience, I suppose. Yeah.
I only cackle because I have dedicated my life to the pursuit of creating this guidebook. Emotions as a second language. I mean,
yeah,
but I think you're tapping on something that is true. The reason why this work is meaningful is that we don't know how to do it. It hasn't been an effort. Before this moment, we were at the whims of historical, sociological, subconscious human forces. And I think this, not to get super philosophical in the last 2 minutes, but the invitation that we're having at this time is to actively like sort of rewrite our narratives. Like we get to go into our own source code and go, ooh, yeah, not this. And make that pivot. And in doing so, it means that like we do get responsibility for processes that otherwise had been sort of taken care of by just the gestalt, the piles. Now it's like, okay, what does it mean to, on purpose, create relations towards an outcome? Like I think that's the hardest one. Like there are people who network and who see relationships always as a way of getting something for them, and everyone sees that and they go, ugh, that's gross. But as we've sort of even outlined in this conversation, the way for us to get to that place to dismantle a lot of these isms is through relational aspect, but relational aspect in holding the intention of having that outcome. So ultimately, it's figuring out what's that difference between the opportunist and the one who is choosing to do that, but in an authentic way. And the only metaphor that I have, it's not complete, but it's that feeling that you get with friendship, with true embodied friendship, where it is 100% for you, 100% for me. It's not 50-50. It's not even a calculation. It's not even like a hedge. It's I give knowing that it's going to come back and not expecting. And when it's healthy, you see it emerge as something almost like a third body. And guiding people into that work for the aim of allyship takes out so much of the thinking. It's the easiest thing in the world to be an ally to my friends. It's just like, oh, what you need? I know you.
Yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Let me just say, I think it's a completely worthy pursuit to try to write down some guides. Like I guess what I really mean is there's no standardization.
Yeah.
But
it's not
definitely
mechanistic. That's I think the key.
Yeah, that's the key. But I think it's so important. And yeah, it is like just showing up. And I was actually thinking, because that's like, me and my friends were talking the other day about like I have some friends who are, many of them are from overseas, and they don't know, like they're not good at the language of social justice. and they may not know all of the terms, and they may have their questions and reservations. But without that, like their actions are always there. They're always just showing up. They're always down to ride. Then compared to friends who I have who are really, really good at all the language and all the intellectual part, but like in action, like it's like, okay, like you did the social media post, but where are you?
Where are you? Yes.
Yeah. And wanting to bridge that, because the first category of friend, right? It's like I was reading this thing about this small rural part of Pennsylvania where there's these two brothers who are both biracial, black and white. And there's this town has one bar, and the bar, like these two brothers were just like, hey, like people, like, you know, they were friends and everybody in the town loved them. And it was kind of like this situation of being like, but he's different, or but they're different than the rest. And they like started agitating because they're like, well, we should take this Confederate flag down in the bar. And why did you vote for Trump? And then all of a sudden they were pariahs. And then the interviewer was like, well, you guys got how did you get exercised and outcast from this community that you grew up and have been beloved in for so long? And they were like, oh, it's because we started like actively talking about racism and rights. And that's the thing, like, it's very interesting because we want to have these intentional communities and intentional friendships where we're working into the same direction and not just abiding each other. And so it's taking those two models and combining them, where we want the language and the attitude to match with the action and the showing up.
And I feel like you said this earlier, and then we'll end here. I think that I was going to ask, but I forgot. I feel like that's a really strong working definition of authenticity. It's when they match, and when you can feel the matching, like when it is not just the abiding, the tolerate, like, I don't want, again, it's a word, but like sometimes you have like those relationships where it's like, oh, I tolerate you very, very much. And it's like, I don't think that's going to make it there. Like I need that. I love you. And where there is a felt sense of that is informed by certain types of craft, and that we collectively, maybe even societally, like haven't figured out how to do that. And I think that's just, when people are looking for like, what does authentic allyship mean? It's like, it's the one that feels like you're loving on someone and not scared for your life or your continued existence or whatever the thing is that you need to do to feel okay, to feel like you can abide.
That's for real. We have to talk again. This was a fantastic conversation. I also, big shout out to Joseph Campbell. I love that you brought it in.
My boy.
It's Noel Ignatiev, and his project was to abolish whiteness. He called for it, so yeah.
That's what's up. Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm gonna and then we're gonna just keep jamming with these. And so I'm so glad for your time and your perspectives. It's really enlivened me. And then we'll keep the conversation going.
Yeah, let's keep the conversation going. When you write the book, I want to get a first edition copy. I want to have that. Say I had the first printing, because I'm sure it'll run until the 15th edition kind of thing. Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Yeah. We will get there, and that doesn't scare me at all. That's not my emotional edge.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I haven't done it in a while, but I used to edit some things for Matthias. So if you ever need a second reader, I'd be happy to.
Oh yeah. Oh, I got to get Matthias on here too. He's on my short list. He's got opinions.
Yeah. All right.
Well, talk to you later.
Wendell.
Bye.